Hey, good morning, world. It's Patrick Lovell, Truth Bomb Riffing the Con, Wednesday, January 3rd at 11 a.m. my time. And Happy New Year to all once again. Today's news that's ringing in the new year is, of course, trending and also being covered on mainstream to an extent, but it's another example of how things are framed to what end and what it all means. And it's incredibly nauseating, quite frankly. So, the first thing I want to address is the Epstein client list. And we've seen that there's speculation that, yeah, Clinton's going to be associated, maybe Dershowitz, although Dershowitz is, of course, admitted to being a part of the whole thing and, never admitting to what exactly happened. I guess he kept his clothes on, something to that effect. But, somebody like Bill Gates, of course, and former President Bill Clinton. And then, of course, everybody on X is awash with, yeah, nothing to see here about Trump. He kicked him off out of Mar-a-Lago and there was no relationship. Meanwhile, that's ridiculous. Many of the women that wound up in Epstein's island came from Mar-a-Lago. And then, of course, Melania was introduced to Trump vis-a-vis Jeffrey Epstein. But in this kind of carnage of celebrity mishigas, if you will, it's like, as far as the real guts of this story go, it's still not penetrating, I guess, the mainstream, and then maybe the mainstream is using it to whitewash or detract. Not distract. That's not the point. It's more like refract. There's a technique involved where it's like, oh yeah, we're going to talk about it and we're going to admit to certain things, but we're going to move it into kind of like the celebrity salacious space. And nothing to see here really, other than what we've seen in gossip media for, I don't know, something like 40 to 50 years. I harken back to like National Enquirer sort of scenarios. But, the main ingredient of what nobody is talking about, except for Pam Martins on Wall Street, in Wall Street on Parade, but the significance of JP Morgan Chase's ties to Jeffrey Epstein over the course of 15 years, through which over $4 billion was deposited and maneuvered in a myriad of ways through the Epstein organization and everything that that reveals, not to mention his ties to billionaires like Wexler and many others. But I mean, just the very basic essence of what we've seen here as it relates to Jeffrey Epstein and the whole process is, yeah, of course, the guy was involved with intelligence. Is it Mossad? Is it CIA? Is it both? To what ends? Well, to obviously leverage very well connected people, very incredibly smart people. Of course, we've seen people on the list such as Noam Chomsky, in addition to the aforementioned. And when you have the nation's preeminent scientists or thought leaders engaged with something so ridiculous, it only can confer one thing: is it there was a organization that had incredibly important ties to everybody that matters. And they were funneled through this Epstein pipeline in some manner, shape, or form. And undergirding it all, because none of this happens without money, is our nation's largest bank. And of course, the CEO of JP Morgan Chase, a gentleman by the name of Jamie Dimon, is someone that is pretty much, for all intents and purposes, the media darling of mainstream, but particularly the New York Times and likes of Andrew Ross Sorkin and all over CNBC and that sort of thing, is as the kind of godfather of Wall Street and the mechanics of capitalism and the guy that knows all. And yeah, as it appears, maybe Jamie Dimon knows all. I can tell you that Jamie Dimon is a 5-time recidivist, engaged in all sorts, manner, shape, or form of financial crimes, including racketeering in the metals I mean, that's what it was. I mean, it was in metals insider trading. And then there was, of course, all things great financial crisis. And the biggest whistleblower of all that seemingly disappeared and went silent was a woman by the name of Elaine Fleischman, that aligns with everything that we've shown you in our work, The Con, of course, at www.thecon.tv. And, many other things, particularly the London whale, which is part of the derivatives trades. And, the whole thing harkens to this sort of disconnect, this American ignorance. It's unbelievable ignorance that, I'd say a vast majority of Americans really wouldn't be able to decipher the nature of private equity, hedge funds, asset managers, too big to fail, systemically important financial institutions, and be able to understand what makes all of that run and what it all means. Now, I think a surface sort of reaction to all of that is that, well, isn't that capitalism? No, because of what I'm revealing to you. It's actually socialism. And therein lies the biggest trick of all. I have always liked to refer to the greatest trick the devil ever played was to convince the world he didn't exist. And hence, this is why the information that I have is the information that the entire system has to obscure, obfuscate, hide, pull a shell game to make sure you don't know who I am. And I used to think I was just, seeing things and kind of my interpretation of my reality was that, look, I didn't, after I made the con and involved with some other things, I didn't bring a whole lot of resources to this effort. In fact, none whatsoever to Patrick Level Truth Bombs the Con. It's just me to you with a microphone and recording, posted online, and hopefully the message gets to people. So I've done I think I'm to 439, 440 Truth Bomb riffs, in which every day I react to what's happening in the mainstream media and the echo chamber to re-engineer and kind of pull it back to try to illustrate and demonstrate and articulate what exactly the system of power is doing and how everything else is making sure that you don't understand this. And here in this Jeffrey Epstein scenario is just yet another perfect case. But it's impossible to tell that part of the story without also taking it to the reality of certain things that have happened, particularly in social media. So I discovered over the course of the last, I'm going to call it a year or so, maybe about the last year and a half, is that social media has specific constructs that it's going to generate likes, feeds, more exposure, that sort of things for things that it wants you to see. So it manipulates you to be able to basically market your life if you're on Facebook, right? Look at all the cool parties I've gone to. Look at all the great people I hang out with. Look at all the really wonderful places that I'm going to. Look at my wonderful dog. Look at my wonderful family. Look at my beautiful wife or husband or whatever the case. And wouldn't you like to be me? I mean, that's, and I played that game really well for a very long time. And it got to the point, though, that I started to really get frustrated because I also was using it as a platform to reveal monumental truths, and they'd go nowhere. And, I'd get more likes and tweaks on a silly comment based on a football game or something that's happening in a safe space than I would with dropping these monumental truths that reveal how tens of trillions of dollars were looted illegally through our central bank vis-a-vis Federal Reserve Act 13.3, which I'm the only person in the country informing you about and revealing how this whole thing works. Because apparently I'm the only one who has all of the information, because the statutes of what enables the lender of last resort capacity to loan in scenarios of crises that was never used before until the 2008 great financial crisis happened in complete contrast to the statutes that manage its affairs. Just most notably, for anybody who understands anything about lending or finance, that we spent tens of trillions of dollars providing tens of trillions of dollars of liquidity to bankrupt SIFI financial institutions, systemically important financial institutions, too big to fail banks that were bankrupted through fraud, that were bankrupted through racketeering, that were bankrupted through all manner, shape, or form of these shadow games that we illustrate to you clearly in the con, which is the blueprint of it all, which, as it turns out, is our entire economy. Yeah, it's insane. And beyond that, there's another sort of connection to leveraging power, and it always has been. So, for example, and this is a story that I haven't actually gone into very often, but I should, because it's relevant to Jeffrey Epstein. And I don't have a lot of the facts, but I can only infer from seeing things up close and personal how this might all work. So every time I've gotten close to real power, I always know that there's something weird in the shadows. There's always a leverage. There's something that, if you're inside the game, that you're playing by the rules of the game, or you're going to be bounced out. And the game doesn't take any chances. And so a lot of the times, the game um, preys upon, I would say, just natural human behavior. And what I've learned over these course of last, I don't know, 13 years, we'll put it at that number, that, and I always frame it like this, that there's two columns of our soul. You have character, integrity, and dignity and decency versus complicity, duplicity, and complicity. That's pretty much the human spirit. And depending on the circumstances, and who's in control, under what circumstances, and what you've got yourself into, whether it's a house and a mortgage and a family, and you're working for a job where maybe you're like doing things that, are unethical or immoral or quite frankly illegal, but you might do so anyway because you're incentivized to do so. And you might be scratching your head the whole time going, that can't be possible. But yeah, it is, because that's what we show you in the con. It's called control fraud. And it's a really diabolical trick that power plays, i.e., the greatest trick the devil ever played was to convince you he didn't exist, through what we call incentives. And that works throughout the entire process. But there's another side of this whole thing, which is leverage. And so going back to, at least in my personal experience in terms of the research of the work that I've been doing, particularly because we're trying to get another documentary off the ground based on the savings and loan crisis, which is the first act of this whole thing, really. At least in the modern era, because this thing goes back forever, man. It goes back centuries. It goes back. I mean, this is the way power operates. And you would have scenarios where banks, savings and loans, apparatuses of, let's say, hedge funds and that sort of thing, would throw these huge sort of events in really glitzy places and glamorous places like Las Vegas or Miami, for example. They would invite politicians, lawmakers, people that they would want to get on their side and lobby them, but then they would have parties, and ultimately they'd bring out hookers and drugs, and they would get people in a situation where they could blackmail them. Whether in the old days it was like pulling out a beta cam and filming in the closet of somebody having sex, let's say with a senator that has a family and a reputation to protect, and they've got the evidence of what he did that they can leak to the press. Once they own you, they own you. And then you start doing things for them, and you get caught up in the groundswell of this whole thing. And this isn't, like I said, new. This has been going on for a long time. Now, I had kind of teased that had a front row seat to some kind of interesting things, and I have in a myriad of ways throughout my career. But as it relates to what led me to create the con and how that happened and everything else, I discovered later that, for example, I happened to mention this on previous Truth Bombs as well, that I was always reminded that if you've ever watched the television series, which I think is one of the top 3 that exist, Peaky Blinders, and one of the great characters who was this associate of Thomas Shelby was played by Tom Hardy, this great English actor. And he's this Jewish diamond trader that got involved with all sorts of dark underground stuff. And his name will come back to me. But anyway, I thought that maybe that character was potentially based on some family members of my partner, because I just happen to know a little bit about the family's background and what they were involved with going back, quite a while, which were involved, quite frankly, with liquor. And prior to Prohibition, a lot of the ways that liquor was distributed throughout the United States from Canada, where a lot of these big distilleries were, they worked with organized crime. And in so much that organized crime could function in a way that you wanted to pay off the police and the judges, a lot of times you blackmailed them by getting them set up with some sort of sexual escapade. And yeah, that happened. And that was a precursor to all things Epstein. And Epstein was just part and parcel to shit that's existed for a very long time. I mean, we've all seen the James Bond stories. We've seen intelligence and who's sleeping with who and who's leveraging who and all of those kinds of things. And it's just, we're all human. And, people with lesser character will play the game the way that people in power want you to play the game. And then once they turn you into that, they've got you. They'll marry and net you, and you'll be a tool in their full circus. That's called leverage. And so when we're talking about Epstein and we're thinking about, this big construct of who's on the list, and mainstream media is like, yeah, well, we've heard that guys like Dershowitz or Bill Clinton or Bill Gates or whatever, but they never bother to ask exactly, why they were there, what they were involved with. They never pressed next level. We never saw on the front page of the New York Times all of the deep dive on all things Epstein, particularly as it relates to going into all things Chase and Jamie Dimon. So that should be your first red flag. And for all of you who are out there that are paranoid as it is, that are manipulated by the other side, which I'll go into slightly, but that can be controlled by, for example, what I experience all the time on X. I mentioned that I pulled off and I was going that direction, but I didn't finish the concept. I got off of Facebook for the most part because it just wasn't going anywhere. And I felt like I was being, the term is, throttled back. And I could observe it. Like I did an 11-hour filibuster with people that went to the Federal Reserve in Washington, D.C., as we demonstrated with, testimony from the highest level actors in this whole thing to reveal facts and evidence of how this whole thing works. And I put the entire package together, and I think we've gotten 3,400 views. And that exists on my page at Patrick Level Truth Bombs the Con. If you go to the click down menu live and you see it, I'd recommend you get there. But not everybody who's not in the game or hasn't been affected directly by this story doesn't necessarily want to spend 11 hours to learn. And that's part of the problem too. But yes, we were, and I know, manipulated to some degree. And I know that I was manipulated in the mainstream as well because of things that I've revealed in the truth bombs. But I think it bears repeating. But I want to finish this thought on Elon Musk and X. So I've seen more and more people now criticizing Elon Musk for things that I believe are just self-evident. I think that Elon Musk is clearly, 2 days ago, I happened across this interview with who was my, I guess my original inspiration to go down this path, a journalist who I think many people will recognize his name, but, they kind of disassociate with him or from him that which made me interested in him to begin with, which I thought he was the best in the business at, but has since kind of gone a different direction. And I think that a lot of what I'm talking about has a play in this. So Matt Taibbi, the former journalist at Rolling Stone magazine, who's now Mr. Independent on Substack, who did, of course, the Twitter files with Elon Musk, and many, probably more of you recognize him from that than anything else. But I knew when I was watching the Twitter files that he was either A, being manipulated, or B, was complicit in manipulating the outcome because he was getting paid big money to do it. But it led to more, shall we say, exposure for Matt Taibbi and everybody that he's been working with to expose, supposedly through a congressional investigation, how social media can be manipulated and also at times sort of in the crosshairs, if you will, of government agencies that have no purpose or no place censoring free speech is the idea, right? But in this particular case, Matt Taibbi just revealed like 2 days ago that, yeah, he felt like he had been co-opted and manipulated and, let's just say what he's inferring, betrayed by Elon Musk. And he goes into this sort of dissertation about, who is Elon Musk? And I speculated some of the same things, which was really validating to hear it from Matt Taibbi at this stage, because quite frankly, it was almost redeeming Taibbi to me. And if you watch my truth bombs, you know that I've been down on Taibbi because how could you go from being at the top of your craft to becoming this weird sort of apparatus and this apparatchik that seems to be manifested by Elon Musk and involved with Tucker Carlson and Russell Brand and Glenn Greenwald and Jimmy Dore and some others that come to mind. And how could the great Matt Taibbi be kind of confangled in that whole thing? And yeah, I didn't mention directly Joe Rogan, but Joe Rogan is kind of a periphery, but Joe Rogan is still Joe Rogan. And I'll set that aside. I don't think Joe Rogan's anybody's bitch, but at the same time, I think there's something that's quite frankly quite dense. Obviously, anybody who's going to go back to the well on Alex Jones over and over and over, there's something you could certainly question about that in terms of legitimacy. I mean, that's just playing to the eyeballs and the crazies out there. And oh yeah, by the way, what did we see recently? We've seen basically Tucker Carlson and Alex Jones elevated in a mammoth way on X, which of course isn't a surprise to anyone who's paying attention. But I heard an interview with another person basically criticizing Elon Musk as somebody who's just gone over the deep end. And this is somebody who knows Elon Musk pretty well, and just wondering out loud, what's wrong with Elon. And Matt Taibbi had mentioned that, well, he thinks that Elon, in addition to being a billionaire and everything that comes with that, but becoming, by being the world's richest guy and involved with all of the stuff that he's involved with, huge government contracts and war and Ukraine and Russia and all of these other types of things, Taibbi just said what I think is obvious, that Elon has a multi personality disorder. But whatever it is, and however all of these questions that I would love to resolve eventually, like if I had the resources, I would love to find out who financed Elon and who is in the periphery and what kind of real money is exchanged from whom and for what. Because just from an outsider's sort of objective view, it just looks to me like all the same types of apparatuses that are involved with what we've seen in the Supreme Court with these billionaires like Harlan Crow and Leonard Leo, which have turned out to be point people for specific billionaires in a specific construct that have funneled money inside the Supreme Court for that whole story, for influence mostly on things that are important to them. If they could infiltrate the Supreme Court, how easy is it to infiltrate social media? And I believe that, Saudi Arabia is on the board of X, and I know they were when it was Twitter, because Saudi Arabia is everywhere, and there's a lot of problems because of that. And then, of course, who might be affiliated with Russia. I know that the likes of Matt Taibbi for some time were, ridiculing the idea of Russiagate, and the emphasis was a little ridiculous, especially considering that Matt Taibbi is an expert in all things financial corruption, but he's missed a lot of pieces, which is interesting. And then ultimately he starts, telling these stories and spinning these yarns that Russiagate is, been completely, blown up, that it didn't exist. But what he emphasizes is the Clinton Steele dossier and all of that without even going into the most obvious aspect of it all, which is Deutsche Bank. And I've demonstrated over and over what the relationship between Deutsche Bank and Putin and, Trump. And it's all over, and it's all public information. Deutsche Bank was fined billions for money laundering for Putin. And, oh yeah, where was a lot of money being laundered by Russian oligarchs, but into real estate that Trump, is the namesake of. And however all that works within his fraud shop that obviously many people have probably forgotten just about a month ago that he's been, on trial for the civil fraud trial, which will probably come to a head here pretty soon. But what does Taibbi have to do with Epstein? Well, we all know that Taibbi got supposedly Me Too'd because there was a time where he was spinning in Russia where he and his colleague had a platform and they were deep inside all of the things that were happening in Russia. I think Taibbi was also playing basketball. I mean, he was like, this super cool character that reminded me of, all of the influences that influenced both of us, primarily gonzo journalism and all things Hunter S. Thompson. And oh yeah, Taibbi was involved with doing all sorts of drugs and partying his ass off and being involved with, I think, suspicious things that maybe somebody kept a, log of and could use against Taibbi, because Taibbi went from being probably the single greatest threat to the fraud and the corruption of our financial system to being a guy that was involved with something that is just, in comparison, kids play. And so here Taibbi is talking about, well, yeah, Elon Musk betrayed me and none of this stuff was what it could have been. And yeah, maybe Elon has a multi-personality disorder. And oh yeah, he is elevating, all of these guys, what they call, what is the terminology for it? I think it's like, God, I can't think of the term of it. It's like spike. Basically, you can turn up the volume on those that you want to have heard, and you can turn down the volume on people like me who have information that I don't know particularly why Elon Musk would want to thwart me, except for the fact that the whole system does. And he's a part of the system. I mean, he's the richest man in the world. He doubled his wealth during COVID. When his wealth on paper, quadrupled or at least doubled, when we know that the sales of Teslas were nowhere their highest point, although I think they reached a nice little marker a couple of days ago because they've lowered the prices on many Teslas. But that wasn't what was driving the stock. It was all manner, shape, or form of all of these different types of manipulations that were made possible mostly because of Federal Reserve policy, because we kept, to use another reference, providing what we call cocaine money, really, to fuel all of these antics of all of these players that are in the financial apparatus, which we think of as capitalism, because of course it's money to create more money, but it's not money in the real economy. It's money in front running, in securitization, and derivatives, and pump and dump, and all sorts of manners of forms and shapes of manipulation that on paper can highly increase your wealth. Not to mention banks lend to you because of tax policy and you're a safe bet, and you can, because of the nature of tax policy, you can actually get your income from loans against revenue that you're going to take a smaller tax cut against, and there's just many more tricks to the game. So maybe that's why Elon would want to throttle me as opposed to elevate me. And then also, maybe it's because I do have what is now the $70 trillion revelation. Do the math. $250 billion Elon Musk's wealth as the world's richest man. Patrick Lovell, a guy you've never heard of, who's giving you all of these variables that equate to ultimately a $70 trillion revelation. And what do I mean by that? Well, what do I mean by that is everything that I put in my work at the con at www.thecon.tv. And you can also see more work at the new Untouchables, and of course, all 400 and, I don't know, let's just call it 40 truth bombs that give you different pieces of this puzzle. But the relevance is again, more validated every single day. So while mainstream media is going to turn the Epstein client list into a celebrity who's who with all sorts of speculation that never go anywhere, that's not a threat to the system, while ignoring all things Chase and Jamie Dimon in their relationship with propping up what became Epstein, all things Epstein's apparatus. And why would that be? Now, in addition to that, I mean, that's just like the front row, the first step into understanding the largest commercial bank in the United States. The ICIJ, the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, gave us a revelation 2 years ago that was relatively quashed in mainstream media. I mean, it did show up in the New York Times in a small print and then like page 6 and all that sort of thing, but it was throttled back again. That revealed that there were over 2 million suspicious activity reports that went to the Department of Justice that never went anywhere. And oh yeah, by the way, the whistleblower that revealed all that, she ended up getting pursued and I think indicted and maybe convicted of revealing state secrets, which is how this whole system gets corrupted and in control. And I don't know. That's what I feel like they've done to me, is through technology, my only voice to all of these platforms, which are manipulated, and all anybody hears is pointing the finger in every single direction and nobody knows what. And the people that are listening by the millions to guys like Tucker Carlson, who I have to say alongside Russell Brand are two guys that have tremendous oratory skills, and they write and they've got great resources too, right? So they write what they're doing on a daily basis. They basically get it, dialed down. They read it from a teleprompter, not so much in Russell Brand's case, because Russell Brand can riff because he just has a mastery of the English language. But they know the talking points and they know what they have to hit and what they have to emphasize. And what I've revealed recently is that, at the apex of this whole thing, Tucker Carlson is always saying that it's all about a tiny group of people that have complete control of the government. And yeah, he's right. And he's spinning this yarn that is making people fearful of authoritarianism, which again, he's right. But only in this sort of like, now we've got this, these just two choices, or, some might say lesser of two evils approach, which of course isn't what Tucker Carlson is arguing for. He's arguing for don't go with that deep state authoritarianism that Biden's the head of, or at least some sort of fixture of. No, Trump is safe. But Trump is just this goofball kook authoritarian that is really nothing but a facade. I mean, he is Mad Magazine. That's what he is. He's not even, to the level of threat, I don't think, of Benito Mussolini, but he is because he's surrounded by groups that are incredibly sophisticated and dangerous and influential. And that's his strength. He's got billionaires as far as the eye can see that also include, I think, the entire apparatus of Saudi Arabia, not to mention whatever Russia's angle is. And I see it just clearly. You could just map it out, all the different pieces of what all of these different, semantics of the playing field are. And what I continue to reveal to you is that they're all fighting for control of the system that I'm revealing to you, because he who has the gold makes the rules. And if you want to use a pop culture reference, it never fails. It's always the same. It's the Iron Throne, which is the White House and Congress and, quite frankly, the Supreme Court. You get all of those. You got the seats of power. You get the Iron Bank, which is what the Federal Reserve is. And what I'm revealing to you that nobody else will, and I can't be quiet about this, and nor can I go away quietly, because if I don't do this, no one else can or will, because I have the entire story. To put into perspective again, we spent approximately $4.5 million to get the $33 trillion truth that became the $49 trillion truth that is now morphed into a $70 trillion situation. That the blueprint is all in the con at www.thecon.tv. Millions of you have to see it, wrap your heads around it to get the blueprint, to get to all of these different things. Or you can just take the shortcut, follow me, understand me, and then get this periodically. But without this information in 2024, with the effort to build a consensus movement, which is what I call a tidal wave populist crusade to purge corruption and drown the fascism that it fuels, you cannot do that with the facts. And if you're not involved with me, you're just a tool in the fool's circus. And I know that's not the best way to try to ingratiate me, to try to get your confidence, but it's the truth. This election is about the lesser of two evils, but yet it's just like we are in the gutter. We are beyond, the worst of the worst in terms of how low can we go? I mean, this is just absurd. Trump has 91 indictments against him. And I happen to watch some really compelling sort of interviews with Lawrence Tribe from Harvard Law School, discussing the 14th Amendment, Part 3, but ultimately how Maine has, rendered its decision in Colorado and so forth. And the only question I have about whether or not Trump can get on the ballot is that isn't the investigation into the insurrection that Congress did constitute discovery for what the states can determine who can be on their ballot or who can't? I mean, where does it say in the Constitution that the purpose of the 14th Amendment, Part 3, where does it say in any of that the law? Where does it say that none of this can happen to prevent somebody who was involved with an insurrection, who was an officer of the United States, they can no longer participate and run in an election? Where does it say that that decision has to come from a jury trial? It doesn't say that. And nor do I understand how anybody would, even though I think everybody says that you're innocent until proven guilty. Okay, fine. But wait a second. If I do a whole handful of stuff, like let's say I'm stupid and I get a couple of DUIs and, my driver's license is suspended or taken and I go to jail forever. There was no jury trial for that. No, it's just the law. If I break, the code of drunk driving, that's a red flag, or not, that's a red line. 3 strikes, you're out, supposedly, unless, of course, you've got a lot of money, and then you can kind of weasel your way around that, because I've seen it with somebody else I know who's, actually, I want to finish off on this point, because it's an extremely important point. My point is that we all know that if you get 3 DUIs, it's 3 strikes, you're out, you're going to jail, you're losing your license, and you didn't get a grand jury trial to be able to make that happen. I just think it's utterly absurd given what we've seen with the insurrection that, and again, I'll argue that Donald Trump was no mastermind. He did not create the insurrection. I think he just played his role in all of those apparatuses that I've alluded to today and before that are involved with these billionaire shadow alliances and also their military industrial partners in fossil fuel and the financialization of this country. They're the ones who masterminded this whole thing. And oh yeah, I think Tucker Carlson is a big piece of that. And of course, you see Tucker Carlson get booted from Fox. And what did Fox admit to? $787 million to Dominion for lying was the settlement before they went to the jury trial, before we found out more information. But it was enough to get Papa Murdoch, who doesn't want to spend a penny more than he has to, that it was embarrassing enough that he decided, just letting people know that our business model is a lie wasn't damaging enough. People just were like, oh, he lies. Okay, let's listen to more lies. And that's another one of my biggest pet peeves. All the American people do are buy lies. And the American dream dies where power lies. So getting back to my final point, because it just happened to trigger in my mind, of this person who I know who's had more than 3 DUIs, who happens to be a very kind of powerful person in our community, that was able to get out of some mega, disastrous, like career-ending scenarios by going to jail and never getting out and so forth. That didn't happen. And I know from on high that there were deals made. And yeah, so there again are 2 levels of law: those who can afford to pay their way out of it, and then the rest of us. Okay. But this person I'm referring to incidentally happened to be the executive producer of a story that incidentally, and it had to be coincidence. It had to be coincidence. I don't think there's any way anybody could have timed this in the way that they did, but maybe they did. Because if I kind of look back and I do the perfect mind kind of recreate in all of the different pieces, it gets a little questionable. But this series landed on HBO that basically revealed the half-sister of my partner was involved with basically what equated to kind of a sex cult. And basically the half-sister ended up being charged and convicted and going to jail. And yeah, it landed on a major platform, HBO. And yeah, it has that sort of semblance and that resonant quality to Epstein and all of the things I'd inferred earlier about how people get leveraged, including Matt Taibbi. And so, yeah, it's so weird to think about all the timing. I'm sure it was coincidence. I absolutely am positive it was coincidence. I'm not saying that all of this stuff happened in continuity because there's too many moving parts to be able to produce a 6-part documentary series with all the things to land at the exact same time that we were going to land with this information that ended up getting quashed by everybody in the system, but particularly BlackRock, who controls the system. And yeah, Tucker Carlson and Jimmy Dore and others are going to tell you, oh yeah, it's all about BlackRock. And it is, but they're not telling you exactly why BlackRock is the situation, and I am. And I'm not going to tell it today. All I'm going to tell you is that I have the information that can take it all down. And ultimately, that's why I'm bringing you this information. And hopefully it registers sooner than later, because we've got to build this mass movement we got to take this information to the people. We're going to do that through a barnstorming tour that's kind of like a Lollapalooza-like scenario where we take all of this information I have in a very beautiful demonstration, and we take it all over the country, and we land in DC, before the election. But we've got to elevate all of this. Is in the effort to elevate this information to somebody we have to get to run for president. I don't know who that is. I've thrown out there, boy, would I like to get Taylor Swift and The Rock involved with this and have them come to us to be a part of this, because it's so easy once you understand what all of this is. It's just simply the richest people in our country can loot from the central bank, a country that is for, of a government of, by, and for the people because of all of the sacrifices this country made in World War II, and then also our industrial capacity and the strength that we created to become the world's reserve currency, to where we've been betrayed by our financial system, where all they do is loot for the richest people in the country. And so billionaires spend billions to loot trillions. And oh yeah, they own the government and they own everything. And all of this is smoke and mirrors. And that's what I'm telling you. And I've got the truth that can turn it all upside down and upside down and right side up if we could put it in the hands of someone that millions of people will register with. And then we've got to get a president in the office that ultimately can do the investigation, which I've already done. But if they're in sync with us, that we take all of this information, we force feed it into Congress, we reveal everything that I'm telling you. And then on top of that, we got to demonstrate to the American people that, oh yeah, $70 trillion. There's 1,000 billion and a trillion. $70 trillion went to a tiny fraction of people to completely control us all, which is ridiculous, and it's stupid beyond comprehension to pervert and negate the rule of law. No, the law isn't, there's not two laws, but there is, and that's what we're telling you. And so all of these different people and the dynamics and everything else, it's to prevent you from hearing what I'm telling you. And if we get to that point where we can sell a president to run for a president to be determined, honestly, I do like Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. I think Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson would get this stuff in a nanosecond, and he has the power to do it, but we'd have to make it in his best interest to do it, which means tens of millions of you would have to be on board. But that means tens of millions of you would have to be on board, not just by sharing me to get me out there to break these algorithms and being suppressed and throttled down by the powers that be because of the algorithms, but also you've got to put in money. Because the Supreme Court said that money is speech, and that's all there is to it. And we're not going to elevate all of these truths above the madness of all of the lies that everybody is surrounded by unless you've got skin in the game. So I'm asking you to invest $13 to reboot the United States and to create the greatest renaissance in the history the world has ever seen, which we can do once tens of millions of Americans know that $70 trillion has gone to the system to destroy us, to poison us, and everything that goes with it, and betray us. If we can turn that into a rising tide raises all ships, man, to the moon, baby, then we are NASA. Then it is like I've said, it's the moonshot, but it's also, like I said yesterday, it's the Manhattan Project to purge corruption. And I have been pushing this boulder to the top of Everest by myself backwards without shoes on. But if tens of millions of you join me and we get this thing hoisted over the peak and down on the other side, it'll become a force that knocks out corruption and drowns the fascism it fuels. So if you, me, and everybody you see who isn't a Nazi, who champions, and I mean champions, dignity and integrity and decency, and we come together in unity for liberty and justice for all, we will purge the misery of tyranny, and that is our destiny, which is the clean new deal. And that's what this is all about. And if you can donate $13, invest $13 today, bring 13 other people, we will build the largest wake-up call and payback in history, bar none. And the only way that's going to happen is if you're with me, because nobody else is willing to tell you this information. And by the way, I have it. I can go against Anderson Cooper, Rachel Maddow, Tucker Carlson, Sean Hannity, anybody. I can go against any economist in this country, any attorney, anyone, because I've got the evidence. I'm walking around with the $70 trillion revelation. Do I quit because nobody's listening? No, I know all the powers that be are trying to make sure that you don't listen. You have got to listen to wake up to get this thing rolling, man. And there's no time to lose. The sand in the hourglass is running out, and corruption burns and fuels fascism. Rise, roar, revolt. Failure is not an option. This is the clean new deal. When you have the truth, you're bulletproof. It's not rocket science. It's racketeering. This, my friends, is the righteous grind. Onwards and upwards.